sham in celebration of Jewish American History Month. Words have consequences. When anti-Semitic rhetoric is normalized, when it's tolerated, when it's amplified in our public discourse, it creates an environment where violence against Jews becomes more likely. When we allow lies about the Jewish state committing a genocide to run rampant, when we dismiss graffiti that says "glory to the martyrs" as youthful free speech, when we claim globalize the Intifada is a rally cry for Palestinian statehood, and when we somehow confuse being pro-Palestinian with being pro-Hamas, it has consequences. It's already led to Jewish students on campus being attacked in libraries and on the quad, as we saw at DePaul and at Northwestern, at UIC, and at the University of Chicago. It's already led to Jews walking to synagogue with their children being shot at, as we saw in West Rogers Park. And Jewish businesses, synagogues, and schools attacked and vandalized, as we saw happen just under 200 times here in Illinois in 2024 alone. Now, we have this tragic murder of two innocent young people in the prime of their lives. In fact, this was the 8th terrorist plot or attack targeting Jews, so-called Zionists, or Jewish institutions since July of 2024. Our community is sad and angry because in so many ways, this tragedy was inevitable. We cannot ignore that the threat landscape is changing. We are seeing lone actors radicalized online, often glorified by extremist groups, carry out targeted attacks against Jews and Jewish institutions. Just look at the online responses from extremist groups across the political spectrum who are celebrating the murder of Sarah and Yaron and even calling for more. Unity of Fields, formerly known as Palestine Action US, that had a strong presence here in Chicago. It's a far-left anti-Zionist, quote-unquote, direct action network that supports targeting of Zionist individuals and institutions. They commented on X, "We ain't condemning shit." The Bronx Anti-War Coalition, a radical New York-based anti-Israel group, wrote on X, "What Elias Rodriguez did is the highest expression of anti-Zionism." Remember that. When you hear the term in Chicago, anti-Zionist, I'm not anti-Semitic, I'm just anti-Zionist. This is what this group said. In a similar post on its Telegram channel, the group added, "We need more Elias Rodriguez in the world." So when those of you in the media report about that, understand in their echo chambers, this is what they're saying. And unsurprisingly, far-right extremist spaces have also responded to the shooting by celebrating the deaths of victims. Some cheered their perceived enemies fighting each other. As one white supremacist wrote, "Rejoice when your enemies kill each other." ADL and many of the groups represented here today are tracking this surge in hate and working every day to confront it head-on through education, through advocacy, through partnerships with elected officials, and through agreements with law enforcement. But it's not enough, and we cannot do it on our own. First, violence targeting Jews should be condemned unequivocally and without a but, and then prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Second, leaders need to stop tolerating hate in the guise of activism. When anti-Semitism is normalized, tragedy follows. Now look, this is a major problem here in Chicago. And too many of our elected and civic leaders have not only been silent on the issue, but some continue to fan the flames of hate and anti-Semitism. ADL has tracked a more than 400% increase in harassment, vandalism, and violent incidents targeting Chicago's Jewish community just over the last 18 months. And it will require real leadership and accountability to douse that fire. And lastly, we need policymakers, tech platforms, and civic leaders to recognize and confront this growing domestic terror threat targeting Jewish communities. How many more times do we have to come together for a press conference to call attention to the rise in hatred towards Jews and the real-life implications of hate and intolerance? Now, in case you can't tell, I'm tired. And in case you can't tell, I'm pissed. But I'm also resolved. All of us are. We're resolved that we're going to do better because we have to do better. Because enough is enough. With that, I'd like to turn the podium over to Beth Ida Stern, the Interim Regional Director at AJC Chicago. And for those of you who know, AJC was hosting the event in Washington, D.C. Where are you, Beth? Thanks.
Good morning. My name is Beth Ida Stern. I am the Interim Regional Director for the American Jewish Committee here in Chicago. We were founded in 1906. Our mission is to eradicate anti-Semitism and keep Israel safe as the Jewish homeland. Our work is around the world and entails diplomacy, interfaith, intergroup collaboration with legislators across lines to come together as humans, to coexist on this planet. I want to thank everybody who's here this morning, especially this amazing group that's behind me, because this is the embodiment of the work of the American Jewish Committee. This is what Sarah and Yaron were doing at the Young Diplomats Gathering, an annual gathering of young adults who get exposure to diplomats, actual diplomats from around the world, who learn about creating peace. The irony that these young folks, 26 and 30 years old, about to get engaged on a trip to Israel, were gunned down as they exited this event after dedicating their lives towards the progress of peace, is the actual illustration of what is going on our planet right now with anti-Semitism. The American Jewish Committee issues a State of Anti-Semitism in America report every year, and in our report from 2024, just published, where we interviewed thousands of American Jews and non-Jews alike, 77% of American Jews stated that they do not feel safe being Jewish in this country, the United States. The only solution is for us to coalesce, for us to build understanding, overcome our differences, and realize that our similarities are what tie us together as human beings. So before I say goodbye to you all, again, I want to thank all of these amazing people. This is what it looks like to break down those barriers. We just need to scale it up. Thank you.
Now I'd like to call on Alderwoman Deborah Silverstein.
Good morning. Thank you to the Anti-Defamation League for convening this press conference at such a critical moment. And thank you to all the organizations who advocate for the safety and security of the Jewish community in Chicago and across the nation. And also a big thank you to my colleagues who are here today, my allies and friends in City Hall, Alderman Gil Villegas, Alderwoman Silvana Tabares, Alderman Peter Chico, Alderman Felix Cardona, and Alderman Ray Lopez. Is Brendan here? Oh, sorry, I didn't see you. And Alderman Brendan Riley. You were on my list, I just didn't see you. This week, our country witnessed a vile act of anti-Semitic terror outside the Capitol Jewish Museum in Washington, D.C. It was an attack targeting Jews simply because they're Jewish. My heart goes out to the victims, their families, and to the entire Jewish and Israeli communities who once again must confront the pain of hate-fueled violence. But this horror hits even closer to home. We have learned that the attacker lives in Chicago and was likely radicalized right here in our city. This is not just a national tragedy, it is a local wake-up call. I've spoken with Superintendent Larry Snelling and our police commanders, and while there is no threat to the local Jewish community, we are not taking any chances. The 24th District Police have immediately started increasing patrols and maintaining heightened vigilance around Jewish institutions. Our community's safety is the top priority. But safety is not just a matter of police patrols. It's about confronting the root causes of radicalization and anti-Jewish hate. What we are seeing today on our streets, on our college campuses, and in our public schools is a growing movement of unchecked anti-Semitism masquerading as political activism. The unpermitted protests that have overtaken our streets, the unsanctioned encampments on college campuses, the orchestrated walkouts in CPS schools, these are not expressions of free speech. These are breeding grounds for dangerous ideologies. They desensitize young people to hatred against Jews and, in some cases, directly incite violence. When our elected leaders enable and praise this behavior, it creates an atmosphere that encourages people to go out and harm Jews. I call on every elected official in Chicago to take a real action to protect our Jewish residents. We need our leaders to work to lower the temperature and diffuse these extremist organizations that are spreading anti-Semitism and hate. When it comes from within our own parties and from our own political base. Statements condemning anti-Semitism are not enough. Thoughts and prayers are not enough. We need action, and we demand it now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Deb. Now, Nancy Andrade, the Chair and Commissioner of the Chicago Commission on Human Relations.
Hello, good morning. Nancy Andrade, Chair Commissioner for the Chicago Commission on Human Relations. The Chicago Commission on Human Relations, also known as the CCHR, we are the city's only agency designated by ordinance to work closely with the Chicago Police Department on the civilian side to assist victims of hate crimes and also to work together with all of my colleagues here behind me from the Jewish community. We have always worked closely with the Jewish community. I have spent most of yesterday morning speaking with most of my colleagues here on the phone, offering our condolences and asking what else is it that we can do together. To reiterate Alderman Silverstein's words, we are ramping up our efforts. We are ramping up our efforts at the CCHR to work together with our Jewish leaders and to really address anti-Semitism, the root of anti-Semitism, and to really combat hate. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. Now, Dan Goldwyn, the Chief Public Affairs Officer from the Jewish United Fund, the Jewish Federation of Chicago. You're next. Chris.
Yeah, my name is Dan Goldwyn. I am the Chief Public Affairs Officer for the Jewish United Fund, Jewish Federation of Chicago, and a proud member of the Chicago Commission on Human Relations. And I want to thank all of my Jewish colleagues, and especially our non-Jewish friends and allies who are here with us today. Metropolitan Chicago is home to approximately 325,000 Jews. As Alderwoman Silverstein noted in her Jewish American Heritage Month remarks at City Hall just this past Wednesday, the first permanent Jewish settlers arrived in Chicago in 1841, growing today to become the third largest Jewish community in the United States. Jewish Chicagoans, like our Latino, Black, Middle Eastern, Asian, and other neighbors, want nothing more than a safe place to raise our families, grow our professions, and contribute to making our broader community welcoming for all. However, with anti-Semitism surging here in Chicago and around the nation, there are too many people trying to stop us from doing just those things. 2 nights ago, Yaron Lashinsky and Sarah Milgram were murdered in an act of anti-Semitic rage outside the Capitol Jewish Museum. Upon his arrest, the suspect shouted, "Free, free Palestine," a chant that is all too familiar from the streets of Chicago, usually accompanied by the call for to quote, globalize the Intifada. For those who don't know, the Intifada means uprising in Arabic. From 2000 to 2005, the last time there was an Intifada, over 1,000 Israelis and others were murdered by Palestinian terrorists. The call to direct that kind of terror against Jews living here in Chicago is not symbolic, it is not a metaphor. And as Wednesday night's shooting shows us, it is all too real. This horrific act is a stark, painful reminder of the consequence of unchecked anti-Semitism and the growing normalization of hatred directed at Jews. This cold-blooded murder is the result of unchecked calls to globalize the Intifada. Accepting the rhetoric of violence has not only been tolerated, but often condoned by some in our public spaces. We call on leadership from government, academia, and civic spaces to clearly and consistently condemn anti-Semitism, no matter where it comes from or who it targets. The urgent need for moral clarity in the face of hate is abundantly clear. I want to conclude by thanking the Chicago Police Department, who proactively reached out to the Jewish community to see how or if they can make us feel and actually be more secure. I also want to thank those elected officials and interfaith partners and civic leaders who've supported the Jewish community during this moment of pain and fear. The Jewish community is strong, and it is resilient. Those who seek to sow hate and division by threatening Jews in Chicago, Washington, D.C., and beyond, they may be loud, some may be violent, but they will not be successful. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Now, Pastor Chris Harris from Bright Star Church and St. James Church. I'm sorry. I want to make sure. I want to make sure I got the second church right.
You got it right. So let me say good morning to all of you all. Pastor Chris Harris of Bright Star and St. James Church on the south side of Chicago. Almost 5 years ago, many of my Jewish colleagues stood with me as I led more than 16,000 Chicagoans marching as a result of the racism that led to the vicious murder of George Floyd. It is sad that today I have to reciprocate standing with you due to the anti-Semitism that caused the heinous and senseless murders of Sarah and Yaron. We are seeing Jewish communities across America and around the world face escalating threats, harassment, and violence. This is not only unacceptable, it is a moral and spiritual emergency. I have lifted up my voice to cry out, release the hostages. I have also unapologetically spoken out against the horror of innocent children and civilians dying in Gaza. And now, with that same voice, I grieve aloud that this young couple should be planning a wedding, not their families planning their funerals. I challenge us all to open our hearts and create safe spaces for real dialogue, for mutual understanding, especially when the issues feel beyond our reach or comprehension. Time and time again, we witness how fervent, misinformed conviction can spiral into unspeakable tragedy. This must end, whether it comes from our house or whether it comes from the White House. Violent rhetoric is wrong, and more importantly, it can be deadly. Language that dehumanizes, stereotypes, and incites is not just hateful, it is dangerous. It lays the groundwork for acts of terror just like this. When we give platforms to hate, we give power to violence. Silence is complicity, and none of us should be complicit. I reflect on the legacy that binds the African American and Jewish communities, from the civil rights movement to struggles for justice in every generation. Our peoples have stood arm in arm, marching together, fighting together, believing together in a better and more just world. That partnership must not only be remembered, it must be reignited. We must return to the work of bridge building, mutual support, and unwavering solidarity in the spirit of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., working with Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, and Booker T. Washington, partnering with Julius Rosenwald. Simply put, I will never stop saying we are better together. I ask everybody in this room, say these words: we are better together. We must all stand together against violence, anti-Semitism, and racism in all forms. To the Jewish community, you are not alone, not in your sorrow and not in your struggle. And together, we will shine the light of love, justice, and truth in these dark times. May God give us the courage to be peacemakers in a world so desperately in need of peace. I share this with a broken heart, but also with an unbroken faith. Thank you.
Thank you, Pastor Harris. And now, with probably the most unfavorable spot in the lineup following Pastor Harris, Allison Pierce-Slovin, the Director of Social Action and Partnerships in the Midwest of the Simon Wiesenthal Center.
Definitely not the person you want to follow.
the Simon Wiesenthal Center, an international Jewish human rights organization, an NGO of UNESCO, joins everybody here in mourning the victims, one Christian and one Jewish, and we demand accountability. Our hearts are with the families of the slain, the Israel Diplomatic Corps, the Jewish community of Washington, and the staff at AJC who were hosting the event and targeted in this horrific attack. But mourning without resolve is hollow. If we do not act, we are simply preparing the ground for the next atrocity. These murders are the results of months of silence, excuse-making, and moral cowardice in the face of escalating anti-Semitism. When Israel is demonized as evil, when Jews are targeted under the guise of anti-Zionism, it emboldens hate and incites violence. Let us be clear. This is the outcome when anti-Semitic hate is normalized on our campuses, in our streets, and online. When leaders fail to call it out for what it is, hate festers, metastasizes, and erupts in bloodshed. This can no longer be tolerated, and our political and religious leaders, as well as each and every one of us, must lead by example and condemn this act without question. Anti-Semitism is not just a Jewish problem. It is an American one. This cowardly act of terrorism in the heart of our nation's capital is an assault on the civic soul of this country. It's a test of our national character, and so far, too many have failed it.
Thanks, Allison. Now I'd like to introduce Yossi Hell, the Executive Director for the Midwest region of Stand With Us.
Thank you all. Stand With Us is an international education organization combating anti-Semitism and supporting Israel around the world. The horrific murders of the Israeli embassy staff this week are a stark reminder of why our work to combat anti-Semitism matters so profoundly. While the investigation is ongoing, we are clear on this point. Calls for an antifada, calls for anti-Zionist hate, directly incite anti-Semitism, hatred, and violence, and ultimately lead to death, as we've unfortunately seen. Our hearts and prayers are with Sarah and Yaron and their families. As David mentioned earlier, enough is enough. Stand With Us and our local partner organizations stand ready to work with Chicago City Council, the mayor, and our partner organizations and council members that are standing behind me to ensure that every resident, not just Jewish residents of the city, but every resident is without fear of living and breathing and just going about their day. We've seen this all too many times. Not only do we not feel safe, but we want to live and breathe and contribute to our community free from the ever mutating disease that anti-Semitism is. As the grandson of a Holocaust survivor, this insidious nature of anti-Semitism is not new to me. It's not new to my family. It's not new to anyone standing behind me or anyone that has been educated. And we stand ready to educate and continue to educate because we are not going anywhere. The only way to move forward is to honor the lives that have been lost this week, is to unite our community and clearly demonstrate that combating anti-Semitism is the only way forward. Education is the road to peace. And when people scream "Free Gaza," they should end that sentence with "Free Gaza from Hamas." Thank you so much.
Thanks, Yossi. And now our final speaker that's scheduled, and then we're going to invite any other members of the City Council who would like to say anything. Asaf Grunberg, who is the Executive Director for Illinois of the Jewish National Fund.
Good morning. I'm not going to repeat many of the things that my colleague here said. Just want to end with one last note, is that this cannot continue to be our reality of the Jewish community here in Chicago and across the United States. Security has been a concern to our Jewish community for many years. more than we can recount. And yet, we feel like this has become a reality, and it cannot continue becoming a reality. Jewish National Fund USA hosts hundreds of events across the country every year. And before we even start thinking about a guest list or a food, we think about security. And we understand that this might not feel familiar to many other people, but it's all too familiar for us in the Jewish community here. It cannot continue being like this. It cannot become the reality of our children. And we want to make sure that our community feels safe here. We will continue being strong. We will not cower because of these events. We will not be afraid because of these events. We will continue standing strong. And we appreciate all of our colleagues. We appreciate all of our allies here being there with us. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Asaf. And now I'd like to invite any members of the City Council. Alderman.
I just want to be brief. I'm Alderman Tabarez, 23rd Ward. I'm going to be very brief. This isn't about politics anymore. This is about good versus evil. And we all are in a position to do something about it. It's our moral obligation to do something. And it's up to us now. And we need to work like our lives depend on it. What happened that other night that took the lives of 2 innocent people in Washington, D.C. is telling us that we need to do something here in Chicago regarding these hate groups. And as this investigation continues, it's my hope that they dive into these hate groups that are extreme, that are radical hate groups that are bringing so much hate in our city. They have found home in this city, and we need to remove them from giving that power to them. These organizations need to be removed from their power. I just want to add that the fact that Israel has to argue to defend itself is scary. It's really scary because the propaganda and the anti-Jewish rhetoric has been festering for years in this city. The first anti-Israel march that happened after October 7th was barely 24 hours after the attacks occurred. And that continued almost weekly. And not only have we seen attacks on our Jewish community, we have also seen anti-Jewish rhetoric and chants from members, from aldermen of the city council, and from bureaucrats that are being elevated by the mayor of the city of Chicago. And those that attack our Jewish neighbors are the same people that attack our law enforcement, are the same people that want to dismantle capitalism, are the same people that undermine the pillars of society that had given so much, that have made the U.S. and Israel 2 of the most successful nations in the world. So we're going to fight against anti-Semitism not being normalized in Chicago. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I feel bad for whoever has to follow all the remarks. That's all you got.
Yeah, thank you. Alderman Gilbert Villegas, U.S. Marine Corps veteran and staunch supporter of our allies. Listen, 2 weeks ago, I happened to be in Israel. And we were very excited because that was the day we happened to be in Israel during the time when the Pope was being announced. And it just so happened that he was from the Chicagoland area. And so I had a bunch of colleagues from Texas, California, New York, Washington, D.C. We were very excited. Just yesterday, I received tons of messages from those same folks that we went to Israel with saying, what's going on in Chicago? Why is there so much hate? Listen, this has been going on for some time now. We see organizations disguised. We see political organizations, specifically in the Democratic Socialists of America, that have found a home for these homegrown terrorists. Now they want to distance themselves from this and say that we don't condone killing, but when you put a gas of gasoline and a book of matches right next to it, someone, and then you say, I'm not going to tell you to go ahead and light it on fire, because that would be bad, but you go ahead and put forward that rhetoric that says that we need to burn this system down in order to create change. That's the type of rhetoric, the type of extremism that's going on in this city. When you pass a resolution in the city of Chicago, one-sided, and not taking into account the challenges and the nuances that are going on in the region, because you want to satisfy elected officials that have an ideology that Israel should not exist, and then now want to say, I'm sorry, we support the Jewish community. No, these are the seeds that you're planting. As a Marine Corps veteran, I took an oath to defend this country against all enemies, foreign and domestic. That oath doesn't have an expiration date. Now, I may not carry my weapon. I have the pen as a legislator. I'm going to work closely with my colleagues in the City Council to put forward legislation and policies that protect the Jewish community and all Chicagoans from the extremism that has taken hold of the city of Chicago. So I stand here today with my colleagues and these organizations here to say that I support Israel. I support the right for Israel to exist. And as an ally, we're going to continue to support our allies. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Alderman. Anybody else? Oh, Pastor, please. Make sure to introduce yourself.
Yep. Pastor Jim Scudder, Quinton Road Baptist Church in Lake Zurich. I was, a couple weeks ago, walking into the embassy in Israel. After security, I was greeted by a wonderful young lady. Her name was Sarah Milgram. And all too soon, with such promise and hope for her future, she is not with us anymore. And it brings it home to me, especially being a pastor that's grown up in the Chicago area, that the perpetrator of this terrorism, this wicked act, was from Chicago. And we marched with our Jewish friends, counter protesting at the DNC. We felt danger on all sides. We are appreciative of the Chicago Police Department who came alongside of us and protected us. But I believe it's that rhetoric and that speech that has been allowed in the city that has led to such a tragedy. We, as evangelical Christians, and I represent millions of Christians around the country and around the world, love and support Israel and the Jewish people. The one that I put my faith in as a Christian is a Jew, Jesus. And so for that fact alone, I love and support the Jewish people, and I believe, and we all believe, Israel has a right to exist. Thank you.
Anyone else? All right, well, I'm going to end with this, and then we'll open it up for questions. I want you to take a moment and think about what it took for all of you in the media to get here. We just told you it was going to be in the loop. We made you RSVP. And even then, we waited to give you the address as to where we were going to be. You came into a building that you had to have your name, you had to go through security, and then you had to still get upstairs and you had to get through multiple members of our staff. That's not just because of what happened on Wednesday. That is what we do as a Jewish community. My 3 young children will never walk into a synagogue where the door is not opened by an armed guard. And for those of us who are Jewish, we know that. We aren't the only religion. We aren't the only people. But that is an experience that my children will never have of walking into their own synagogue without someone standing there with a gun to protect them. We spend millions of dollars. I've heard Dan talk about this a lot. The tens of millions of dollars that we spend as a community to fortify Jewish institutions rather than feeding people or putting roofs over their heads or educating them. Think about the money that we are wasting on security. We aren't wasting it, but that we're spending on security, not for social services and helping people. We're just trying to keep them alive and safe. So there's a couple things that we can do immediately, and then we're going to wrap up. First, we would love to see the state of Illinois develop a statewide plan to combat anti-Semitism. We've had these conversations with the state, and we believe that now is the time. Second, the General Assembly needs to make sure before they recess that they pass a bill that mandates hate crimes training for law enforcement. This bill is widely supported by literally every at-risk vulnerable community in this entire city. I'm seeing Dorothy, who was at a news conference at the Chicago Urban League before the beginning of last year, calling for this bill to pass. To be clear, this bill is being held up by a handful of members of the Progressive Caucus in the House of Representatives. If they let it go, it would literally sail through the House, it would sail through the Senate, and the governor would sign it tomorrow. But this bill training our law enforcement on hate crimes is literally being held hostage by members of the Progressive Caucus in the General Assembly. And then lastly, don't forget what we're talking about today after your long Memorial Day weekend, and move on to the next story. The response to this has to be continuous. The response of this can't just be somebody said hearts and minds and then we move on to the next issue. It just can't. And so with that, we'll stop and take any questions that you may have, and I will invite anybody to come add anything to questions as appropriate.
Things you mentioned earlier was a responsibility of tech platforms doing something about this to mitigate anti-Semitic speech online, but we also know that there are tech platforms that are specifically moving away from regulating speech like that.
Yeah.
Can you comment on that and what you would like to see?
Yeah, I would say, look, I can speak specifically from an ADL perspective. ADL Center for Technology and Society has done significant studies in the responsiveness of tech platforms, and we've actually graded them on their responsiveness of anti-Semitism, Holocaust denial, other forms of hate. You know, you have a platform like Meta that just gutted its entire fact-checking department, and they're moving away from it. And so what we need to do is we need to apply pressure in a real significant way on tech platforms that they have a responsibility, that they have a absolute responsibility to check and remove hateful speech that is insightful, not insightful with an S, but insightful with a C. Right? And so we need to do that. Congress, there's a role for federal regulators to play. And there's also a role that states can even play too. And we've seen that in places like California and others. Anybody want to add anything, by the way? I don't know who else is doing tech work. Okay.
You mentioned that the suspect was radicalized in Chicago, and that there are others who are radicalized in Chicago. And you talked about how there seems to be many groups here. How do you, or what do you suggest the police or any group do? You know, how do you get at those groups? How do you stop?
Yeah.
What do you suggest?
Look, so there's a couple things, and then I invite anybody to add anything. Look, the lone wolf is the biggest threat and the biggest concern of law enforcement. We don't have law enforcement in the room right now, but it's their biggest concern. If you ask the FBI, if you ask the Department of Homeland Security, why? Because you're essentially trying to find a needle in the very large haystack. But what the issue of that lone wolf piece, though, I think speaks to the larger piece. Number one, of being indoctrinated with this type of hate and misinformation, right? So folks talked about the chants that you hear in the streets, the sort of excuses under the guise of social and political activism, of really what it's doing. I think Alderman Villegas said, you know, you're leaving a can of gasoline and handing them the matches, because that's what you're seeing on social media. And the hardest part is, right, you don't have to find a room in the middle of the night, right, to be exposed to extreme views. You just pick this thing up. And it used to be you had to go into the deep dark web. You had to get some password protected chat to be exposed to extremists. Now, as we just heard with tech platforms, it's easier and easier to be exposed in the mainstream, right? So there's a couple things that need to be done. Number one, there's the regulation of these tech platforms. Number two, we have to think about the discourse that we have in society and what role elected officials and civic and business leaders play in modeling what is acceptable behavior, and frankly isolating those who have extreme views and not empowering them. Like, that's absolutely critical. And also there have to be mechanisms through which law enforcement can be notified if there are concerns about individuals who potentially could be threatening. And look, there's a lot more to learn about this particular individual and what was fueling him. But what we've learned so far is that he was radicalized through a network here in Chicago, and likewise nationally as well, exposed to certain ideologies. And then he believed that that marching was not enough based on what we've read in the newspapers. You hold them accountable. Like right now, tech platforms are not accountable for having misinformation. Was it, Chair, Section 230 of the National Communications Act, or federal? the Federal Communications Act. Congress needs to amend Section 230, which provides immunity to tech platforms right now for what happens. Right? If you listen to what Mark Zuckerberg said, for example, when he testified before Congress, he was like, listen, if you called 20 years ago or 30 years ago, if you called somebody to to issue a bomb threat, you didn't sue the bells. They were just the platform through which, the conduit through which, or the platform through which, the person made the threat. I'm not responsible for the threat, right? These tech platforms are not guaranteed under the Constitution. They're just not. They're private companies. They can use their user agreements to kick people off, to deplatform. They did. And then we've seen in the last few years when Elon Musk bought X, right, the deplatforming of people. You saw Facebook and Meta that changed their policies, right, the deplatforming of the replatforming, of people, right? So Congress could amend that act and actually hold tech platforms accountable. And I guarantee you, look what's happening right now on college campuses. Universities are being held accountable for the anti-Semitism on campus. And what are they doing? They're changing. Accountability is a tool that can be incredibly effective in changing behavior. But right now, they're not accountable. Anybody else?
I think the other piece of that puzzle is leadership leads. To echo what Alderman Villegas, Alderwoman Tabarez said, is that we have to create an environment where those extremists don't feel welcome anymore. If leadership leads, they need to fill the void. I'll give you an example of the kind of impact this can have. Not long after October 7th, I usually take the Brown line downtown to work, I attached a patch to my backpack. So I wanted anybody I was walking with to know that I was a supporter of the United States and I was a supporter of Israel. I got on the Brown line this morning to come down here, and for the first time I wondered, should I pull this off? Because two people who were at a highly secure Jewish event in Washington, D.C. were murdered. I'm walking to a train. David mentioned the lone wolf. That's what scares us. But we can begin to push those ideologies aside if leadership leads. We have examples of leadership here. We need more leadership.
Hi. Simon Wiesenthal Center, and like the ADL, we have a research department that does a lot of work with the platforms as you were discussing. But I also want to say that we have to empower our students. So Illinois has a unfunded mandate. It's called Digital Media Literacy, and we did get a grant from the state of Illinois. So we are working with the Illinois State Board of Education, and we have a curriculum called Combat Hate, which is we're in the schools for free to any school who requires it, to teach students how to look at their platforms, what their social media looks like. But also we have to educate the teachers, and we have to educate the parents, because as my colleagues know, games such as Roblox, anybody here know what Roblox is? My grandchildren play it. It is a way of recruitment for white supremacist groups. And until we all know as adults in the room what's going on and educate our parents so that they can monitor their students or their children, this is going to continue. So all of us with our colleagues work together. We're all trying to tackle the same cancer at the same time, but education still is the key to all of this. Thank you.
David, question for you. How do you bridge the gap locally between non-radical organizations? Because we've seen these anti-Semitic attacks in West Rogers Park on campuses here in D.C. We also saw the Palestinian boy stabbed to death in Plainfield in 2023. So how do you kind of bridge it together between the organizations who want to protest for peace in a non-radical way?
Then they should protest in a non-radical way. Like I think I would say this. I think your premise is off just a little bit, because here's the thing: it suggests that like you can't do it and that you have no control over it. The answer is you do, right? ADL tracked well over 5,000 what we would consider to be anti-Israel protests in 2024. When you look at our annual audit of anti-Semitic incidents, only 2,500 or so of them were included in the audit, which means half of them we didn't deem to be anti-Semitic in nature at all. Saying free Palestine in and of itself is not anti-Semitic. I said it in my remarks, right? Like, just because you're pro-Palestinian doesn't make you pro-Hamas. I mean, like, I was doing work in the West Bank when I was a student at Hebrew University in the late 1990s, right? So, like, the way you do it is you just don't do it, right? If you're a leader of a group like U.S. Palestinian Community Network or CARE, or AMP, or Samidun, which no longer exists. All of them have had major protests, right? The way you do it is when chants begin, you as the leader, you lead. You shut it down. You make it clear to people coming to the protest. You don't bring a sign that says, globalize the Intifada. Like, we're not going to have a sign that celebrates and calls for violence against Jews. We're not going to have something that says, glorify glory to the martyrs. We're just not going to do that. We're going to fight for Palestinian statehood, or whatever it might be. You just don't do it. And here in Chicago, the other thing that we can do, which I didn't say, and I will make it clear that this is me speaking for ADL. Like, if you're the mayor, you stop appointing and elevating people who have a history of being hostile to members of the Jewish community. And when you find out that they have that history, you get rid of them. Think about Pastor Johnson. The anti-Semitism isn't what doomed him. It was the 9/11 conspiracies. The anti-Semitism was known for multiple days, and the mayor continued to allow him to have the job of being the head of the CPS board. It wasn't until it came out that he was a 9/11 conspiracy theorist and said it was a, quote, inside job, that he lost his gig and was forced to step down. He's tried to elevate, right? He took one of the most active aldermen who's out there at rallies with burning American flags, with calling for, chanting, leading the chants, right? And who was part of a training program at a union where Death to America was taught to participants in Farsi, and he was one of the guest speakers. I'm talking about Alderman Cicho Lopez. And what happened? We tried to elevate him to what? The zoning committee, I think, right? Arguably one of the most powerful positions in the city of Chicago. Just don't do that. That's how you say, if you hold those views, you don't have a seat at the table. But as long as he and others continue to do that, as long as he and others say, it's okay, and I'm going to permit and I'm going to allow protests to occur, even though we know it's breaking the law because you're supposed to have a permit, or we know that Jewish students on college campuses are being harassed in these encampments, and I'm not going to authorize CPD. And in fact, I'm going to prohibit CPD from going in there to remove the encampments to support the universities. Like, that's how you tolerate it.
Has there been ever a thought to meet with those organizations hosting these massive protests for Palestine here to express those concerns? Obviously, you guys have spoken out a lot about it. I'm just wondering how you can kind of take this moment and lower the dialogue locally when naturally this stuff divides us.
I have a hard time talking to people who think I shouldn't exist. Not because of Israel, but because I shouldn't exist as, I shouldn't. They are fueling the flames of anti-Semitism, right? USPCN on October 8th or 9th, they put out something that said, Zionists should not be allowed to come together, and I'm paraphrasing it, it's on their Instagram page, without being, Dan, what was it, approached or something? Or something like that, right? And I may be going off, maybe some of my colleagues don't agree with everything I'm saying, I invite them to offer. Look, we would love to have dialogue, right? But when there's just constant lies that are being made and it's part of a campaign, like an organized, well-funded campaign, it's hard. It's yeah.
You mentioned that you spend a lot of money on security. What more will you now do in light of this at future events? What more in terms of security will you have to do to increase security?
I'll let the security guy talk about it.
Well, we're not going to tell the specifics, but I'll just give an example. So 2 weeks ago, we did an Israeli flag raising in Daley Plaza. It cost us $15,000 to raise the flag because we had to bring in security barriers, extra security, and then layer on top of that, the taxpayer expense have CPD there to make sure we were secure. So right now, we're in the process. We've notified, JUF did, all of the synagogues in Chicago, all of our partner agencies and organizations, that now's the time for extra vigilance. There are no known credible threats in the city of Chicago, but now's the time for extra vigilance to make sure you review your security protocols. Our security team does regular security audits. We partner with CPD, with Secure Community Network, a national Jewish security organization based in Chicago, to make sure every synagogue, every Jewish organization, every Jewish institution has the ability to review its security measures. And then we have a nonprofit security grant. So right now in the state of Illinois, there's actually an open funding mechanism for $20 million for this fiscal year to get a nonprofit security grant. There's a federal program which was locked up and has now been reopened. And right now we're waiting for the state legislature to reauthorize hopefully another $20 million for next fiscal year. But it goes back to David's point, somewhere between $5 to $10 million every year just in Chicago or metropolitan Chicago is spent on security. That's $5 to $10 million, not feeding, clothing, housing, educating, or caring for people. It is going just to security. And right now, because of what happened in Washington, D.C., every Jewish organization, every Jewish institution is revisiting their security plans, is reviewing their protocols, what training do they need to bring in, how do they harden the facilities, and so forth. And it is a real shame, like David said, that none of us will go to a wedding, a funeral, a bar mitzvah, or a regular day school program without seeing some form of security meet us at the gate.
I just want to point out that the shootings in Washington on Wednesday night were outside of the facility. Like all Jewish organizations, we had security on site. This happened in the street. What kind of security are we expected to hire? I know the first time that I ever visited Israel decades ago, I was so struck by the number of IDF soldiers that were accompanying groups of kids with weapons on their backs. What kind of society is that where you have to protect kids with guns because they're going on a field trip? This problem goes so much deeper than the protection of facilities.
And then we're going to wrap.
Okay. And it shouldn't be lost on anyone here that the Jewish community here in the States represents not even 2% of the U.S. population, but is subject to nearly 70% of religiously motivated hate crimes. And unfortunately, we're living and breathing that again this week. Every Jewish American who wears a yarmulke or is walking to and from synagogue is going to have to look over their shoulder again. So when you talk about what are you doing for security, there is the practical and the physical changes, but there is an emotional toll that every single Jew in the U.S. is now feeling very, very acutely, and that's not going to go away. Some of us have been experiencing that our whole lives. The next generation is now feeling it in a way that like some of us haven't actually experienced, and it's really unfortunate, and no one should feel unsafe walking to and from school, walking to and from synagogue, their church, their mosque. This is a problem that needs to be addressed, and like it's been said over and over again, we call on our elected officials to do more. Now is the time. Every single one of us stands ready to help, educate, bridge the divide between the communities. And yeah, we're sick and tired of having to, belabor the point that we have a right to exist, but we're tenacious. We're not going to stop. So we welcome any dialogue, but, just acknowledge the fact that we're here. The state of Israel is here and is not going anywhere, just like the Jewish community in the U.S. is not going anywhere. So thank you.
Yeah, let's do the last one. And then I just recognize some of you may have deadlines at 11. No problem.
In the Black community, we have what's called the talk. I think you probably all have heard of the talk that you have, especially with the Black kids.
Yeah.
What's that talk look like?
Can I talk about that? Because I just
Yeah.
had the talk.
Yeah, I was going to say, I just had it with my daughter. I just had with my daughter who went to...
Hi, Jane Charney with Jewish United Fund. My son turned 13 on Wednesday, and he's about to have a bar mitzvah, and he started to wear kippah. So we are not observant. As you can see, I'm wearing pants. I don't live in West Rogers Park. I live in Lincoln Park. And my son, when he travels to his Jewish youth group, when he goes to school, he started to wear a kippah. And I've had this conversation with him. Hey, when you're on the bus, do you want to put a cap on? Do you want to put a hat on top of your kippah? And that's the talk, right? That is the conversation. Do we look over our shoulders? Do we wear our Jewish and stars or other any kind of pins and other things that identify us? Our Orthodox community members cannot hide the way that I can pass, for example, right? But I think for all of us, we're having these conversations with increasingly younger children to make them aware that this is our reality.
Thanks so much. With that, I want to thank everyone for coming. I want to thank all of you who stood up here for almost an hour. With that, we will break. And of course, feel free to take snacks on the way out the door so that we don't have to eat them. Thanks.
Never